Anyone that knows me probably knows that I love a top-down racer, and I will get my little trotters into any that I spot. And that brings me to Pretend Cars Racing, a game that was released in 2023, but I totally missed it. And it's by solo developer Patricio Marin, who is busy starting work on a sequel. So I thought it was a good time to go back and see whether my little piggy trotters could get involved and enjoy this game. And I'm delighted to say it's a successful game, and I very much recommend it. It does some really interesting and unique things that I think give it its own personality and voice, as well as having some room for improvement in a sequel that I'd like to see. So we're going to kind of walk through that. Pretend Cars Racing is primarily a single player experience, but it's a structured one. It comes with a career mode that moves you through a multidisciplinary career that starts off with hot hatch road cars and 4 tracks for you to complete races in, and if you end up in the top 3 at the championship at the end, you can then progress up to the next car class as you go. There's broadly speaking 6 car classes. So you've got formula cars, you've got vintage retro cars that look like little cigars, you've got prototypes and GTs, for example, and a couple of road cars in there as well. And they all handle slightly differently, but have this interesting handling model where you need to kind of nudge the car around sometimes so that you don't get yourself into a 4-wheel skid, because you don't drift with these cars very well. They go into an oversteery skid, and so you're always trying to work out at what point is each car going to brake and send you into a slow spin, when actually you just want to kind of turn, neg it, and like blast out of the hairpin corner as best as possible. The interesting thing around all of these different cars is that they're all quite wide and long, but the tracks are quite narrow. And this is both a blessing and a challenge, as well as a curse, and I'll kind of explain why. One of the best things that I can say about Pretend Cars Racing is that one of its tiers of car class is prototypes and GTs, and you can put them together so that you can have multi-class racing, 6 of one and 6 of the other. And depending on if you're in the prototypes, you're going to have to really think about when you dive bomb the GTs that you're lapping, because if you hook up to them, they will very quickly hook you off and spear you off onto the grass, and the grass is very slippery and spinny and twirly-whirly in this game, and you lose tons and tons of time. Similarly, if you're racing in the GTs, you're going to work out how you're not going to be biffed off of the road by the AI in the prototypes whilst you're being lapped. And genuinely, the amount of fun that I was having with Pretend Cars Racing in the multi-class races was phenomenal, and it's by far my favourite aspect of this game. That then doubles down with the fact that your game is in constant Hotlap mode. So no matter what car and track combination you've got, there is an online Steam leaderboard that matches like a time trial Hotlap mode. But it's going on as you race, and so every time you cross the line, it's updating, if you've improved your time, to your position on the leaderboard. And so if I'd been biffed off by AI, or if I'd caused my own problem, or if I was cruising out front in the lead, I never felt like I could take my foot off the gas, because I was always desperate to be like, right, if I don't need to go for a position, I'm going to have some fun on that leaderboard instead. And it made the game incredibly enjoyable and felt like I was always engaged in the race, no matter if I was well out in front, battling in the pack, or way behind because I'd made a mistake. Now, you've heard me mention a couple of times biffed off by AI. And this is really one of the sole downsides that I have with Pretend Cars Racing. And that's that the AI will stick to their line no matter what is going on around them. And so they have total disregard for the player. And because the cars are quite long and wide, trying to race side by side with AI can be quite difficult on some of the tracks, because there's barely enough room for 2 of you side by side, let alone going 3 wide, never mind getting round corners where you've got cars that are about to break off into a skid. And so I did find myself getting frustrated with the amount of times that I was being biffed off by AI in seemingly unfair ways. But I soon learnt that actually I can give as good as I've got, and I can biff them off just as much too. And so whilst the SimCady way of the physics and the driving lend itself to needing much more precision and skill than perhaps many other arcade top-down racers, there's then this weird kind of Demolition Derby element to this game that means that sometimes you've got to get your elbows out, and I'm not always sure that lends itself well to like Formula car racing, for example. So it's just a bit of cognitive dissonance there. In the game itself, there's 30 tracks. Some of them are quite small and tinkery one for some of the smaller, slower classes or retro classes where you've got some of the vintage cars out and they're much more flowy. And then there's 20 tracks that are what called international tracks, inspired by real world venues that feel much more like fully fledged circuits that you can kind of get around and go. So there's plenty of fun to be had, loads of different car and track combinations to get stuck into. And in the build your own race kind of mode, you can choose the amount of laps, the AI difficulty, set up multiclass racing if you want as well, and just have loads and loads of fun getting those hot laps in where you can too. For me, this is still very much worthy of a buy, even though we know a sequel has now just started to be put into development, because for all of this, the game's only £4.29p at full price. And so I would recommend this just on what's here alone. It's well put together, works great with a controller as well as keyboard, and whilst the AI did make me go, ah, a few times, that was easily overcome by the general fun and chaos that I was having in Pretend Cars Racing. So yeah, little one that snuck under the radar this, but I'm glad 2 years later I've circled back round to it and got to enjoy it, and that's why I wanted to do this video, to make sure you lot do the same too. Take care. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/Higherplane Network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.